what you're gifted in, you've got to be responsible enough to use that. Find how you can use your gifts to better the community that you're in. Look down at where your feet are. And wherever your foot is, that's where your mission is. If a person is sitting out there listening or watching and they're like, I want to do what Ryan and Jay are doing, go for it. Look down and see where you're standing. And if you're standing in a spot and a company that will allow you the space to do this, then go for it.
Jay Whitlow.
What's up?
How are you doing?
I'm well, man. You?
I'm doing excellent. Cannot complain. Incredibly busy, incredibly grateful. Thanks for coming in today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wanted to talk. We've got a podcaster in today, Terra.
Uh-oh.
Yes.
We love to see it. We love to see more podcasts popping up. I wanted to talk with you today about the aspect of building community through podcasting. Right?
Sure.
So, first and foremost, if you can just let everybody know a little bit about you and your background, and then we'll talk about your podcast.
So we moved from the Dallas-Fort Worth area in 2007.
Okay.
I was in ministry, education, higher education work. My family was out here building frac pumps. And one day they made the statement, you're not going to make any money in ministry, which is true, actual statement.
Okay.
3 kids, they're young, they want to go to college, they want to do things in life. I better make some money. So the offer was to come out to Midland, Odessa and learn the family business. So I fought that for 2 years. And then finally in 07 said, okay, let's throw everybody in the sliding minivan and let's move out here. And we did. And I started buying round bar and learning the oil and gas industry from the family business, building frac pumps. Dave Ramsey says, don't work for your family. That's absolutely accurate.
Okay, good to know.
And so none of the family lives here anymore but us. But it did help me launch a nonprofit where I learned some skills here in the industry that helped me do some work over in Africa, Central African Republic. So we started drilling wells, water wells, and then teaching people in Africa how to maintain and take care of those.
Wow.
Wells. And so that kind of springboarded me back into where I really love, and that's being a people person.
Okay, so you're working for a company called Performance Chemical.
Yeah.
When I first met you, you were like, hey, we're starting a podcast. And I
Yeah.
was like, an oil and gas podcast? And you're like, not necessarily, but it has a community aspect with the oil and gas industry, right?
Yeah, there's a thread that runs back to that. But my role at Performance Chemical is fluid. It's always changing
Okay.
as the industry is always changing, and we're coming up with new things to do. But my role primarily is public relation and community engagement.
Got it.
Now, there's some analytic, there's some sales involved in some of that when I'm, in a community engagement opportunity. I'm always selling the company, right? I know we provide chemicals for every part of the industry in the oil and gas. So whatever your need is, we've got that chemical. But there's a lot of chemical companies around. So what sets ours apart? Well, one is you get really good, great, superior customer service, right? You get quick service that you can rely on. You don't have to wait on it because we're a big company and you got to jump through a lot of hoops to get to the service that you need. We provide real-time, reliable data in the field, in the digital space,
Okay.
which is something that I really love about what our company does, is that no matter what line or tank or well that you've got, we can monitor it from anywhere.
Nice.
And we know exactly what's going on, what's wrong with the pumps, what's wrong with the wells. We can monitor that. It's something that we did over in Africa,
Right.
monitoring those. So I'm excited about that. We also have the only the dry chemistry plant in the Permian Basin.
Oh, wow.
So, chemicals are mostly liquid,
Mhm.
and this is a dry form of the same chemical brand. And so it functions a little bit differently. But I can sell the company all day long, but I'm not real
Right.
familiar too much with the chemical part.
You're not a scientist by any
No,
means.
not a
chemist, yeah.
scientist, geologist,
Sure.
chemist,
Yeah.
any of that
That
stuff.
makes sense.
But what I love to do is I love to talk to people,
Okay.
right? I love to hear their story. I love to share the story. So one of the reasons why I think my role at Performance Chemical works is because I have the space and the gifting to go do that community engagement, that piece of it. So does a chemical company need to do a podcast? I would say, yeah, I think pretty much every company needs to do something in the new digital space. This is a new sales technique. This is a new way of getting your message out. You know, we were on the news, we did a commercial,
Yeah.
doing different podcasts and interviewing different people. And every single person that we've interviewed, even you, was like, why would a chemical company do a podcast? There's only so much you can talk about chemicals.
I get questions all the time from people that are like, I want to start a podcast, or I want buy-in from my company to start a podcast. How did you go about convincing the company? Because typically you would think that the powers that be, right? The board, the C-level suite or whatever, would be like, what's the ROI on having a podcast, right? Are we going to be on an earnings call talking about this podcast?
Yeah, every time we have an episode comes out, we're not going to see cha-ching come out of it, right? There's not going to be that, like you said, the return. But what it is doing is it's selling who we are. It's letting people know the name. I can't tell you how many people I've talked to who said, we had no idea that that company even existed until you did the podcast, or until you were in front of a nonprofit and did a donation or did a service. So I believe the buy-in has been that it's another level of selling the company. It's another avenue of getting who Performance Chemical is, or any company, into the marketplace, into a digital space, right? And the other thing that I would encourage people to do is, if your gifting is in talking and sharing and being comfortable in front of cameras and microphones, and that is something that the company wants to promote and do, if that's your gifting, then that's the space that you need to be in, right? I mean, I'm a very missional, spiritual type person, and so I would relay this, that, you know, God doesn't make tables and chairs, but he made the trees. It's my responsibility to take what's given to me and make something out of it. And so if I've been given the gift, which you're brilliantly at doing, of communicating and working cameras and working microphones and doing that space, if you're gifted in that, then you need to do something with that. If you're not gifted in it, then don't try it and force it.
Right.
And I think a lot of people try to force things. So I'm not forcing this. This is just flowing out of my gifting. But don't put me up in front of a chemist and try to crunch numbers and scientific research, because I will fail
We
miserably.
actually brought in Bill Nye. If you want to come in, we have Bill Nye, everybody, to talk.
Oh my
about
gosh, I'm out.
I'm curious the aspect, because when we first met, I think you had just started the podcast.
Yeah.
And you know, I like to research everything that's going on here and who's doing what and things like that, because I feel like this is a smaller city, right?
Sure.
Than the most, 150,000 plus, you know, throw in Odessa, you got another double that, I guess.
Right.
But in terms of like, the more podcasts that start to pop up, the more storytelling.
Sure.
Right? I think that it shines a light on, you know, 1 to 2 cities that the rest of the country may not know as much about, or they may just know one sector of it, which is obviously oil and gas.
Right.
Right. And you get to tell a little bit more stories. So I was really curious, and I was really impressed by the aspect, and I didn't know your background, of how you were consistently bringing focus to the nonprofit sector here in town, right? Because and you were very blunt. You were like, listen, we're an energy company, right? We're not in this to make money, right? We don't need to make money from podcasting. But I loved it that you were going like, but we do want to bring, you know, focus to the over 1,200, 1,500 nonprofits that are here in Midland.
Right.
Was that because of your ministry background that you were like, this is the perfect opportunity to bring awareness?
Yeah, I think that's just where my heart is bent, is to helping people. Again, you know, that's why I fought it for 2 years to come out to the family business. You're telling me I'm going to uproot my life and I'm going to go as a people person, and I'm going to work in a warehouse, in a shop, and I'm going to take a, 8-inch piece of metal and I'm going to turn it into a valve or a seat. That's what I'm called to do.
Sure.
Well, sometimes you've got to get in those spaces to see what the next thing is, right? You're not always do things fall in your lap and go, oh, this is exactly what I'm supposed to do. So I had to work in that for probably 5 years to find that next space that I need to be in. And that was the nonprofit world of drilling, water and stuff. So now that I'm in this space, I'm like, I like introducing people to people. You can call it connector. I mean, that's what a catwalk is, right? It's a connector from one location to another. It's even part of the platform on an oil rig. So it's a natural name for me to connect people.
I see.
And so when we sat down to talk about this podcast, which we are a year and 1 week old today.
Congratulations.
And so we're out of that infancy. We're out of that honeymoon stage, right? We should be churning out some good stuff. But I think the one thing I'm most proud of is the name of Performance Chemical getting into circles that would not have ever gotten into if we didn't have this space.
Right.
Can that company or any company exist without doing a podcast? Absolutely. They did it before.
Sure.
And they're making more money.
Of course.
But as you see, things move toward that digital space.
Just so we're all aware, the podcast is called The Catwalk Show.
Right.
When you first told me that name, I was pretty confused again, because I was like, oh, is
The
it
only
about
catwalk you knew was Tyra
RuPaul's
Banks.
Drag Race? I was on there. Is this runway modeling? That's kind of cool.
You haven't seen me fully
See, and
get into the mode.
Maybe that's the new direction. I don't know. Who is this podcast for? And then after being a year in, what direction are you looking towards?
Yeah, from the very beginning, we really didn't know the direction we wanted to go. We really didn't know the audience that we wanted to reach. We just knew that this was a space we needed to jump into, right? And again, I'm the person who's like, hey, let's try it. If it's not going to work, then we're going to try something else. But if we're going to do this, let's do it with excellence, right? So we tried a few things. It didn't work. We tried a few places, and we really didn't get into our lane until probably right before the first of the year, when we kind of built out our own studio.
Yeah, it's
we
gorgeous.
brought in our own producer. We said, if we're really going to make this thing work, then let's be like what you guys are doing here, right? Let's get a real studio. Let's get a real thing going. And so that's really springboarded us forward. Is people come in and they're like, oh, this is a pretty legit studio, right? This is not just us and a recorder, right? Sitting down and recording something and then throwing it out there just because we have to be in the digital space.
Right.
We want to be very intentional about this. So our audience has really now moved toward, each week I've got people who are watching after it's been out for like 10 minutes, because they're intentionally knowing that this show drops on a certain date, certain time, and I set it like clockwork to do that. And the exciting thing is we have a different type of guest every week. We'll have a nonprofit leader, we'll have an entrepreneur, we'll have a city leader, we'll have an industry executive. So nobody really knows who the next guest is. There's no consistency in the type of guest we have, but there's consistency in kind of the direction that we're going, because we want people to tell their story. It's a platform for you to tell your story, right? There are other podcasts who need to talk about what's going on in the oil industry, pros and cons, what's work look like, what's the field look like, and those are great, and I support those 100%. There's other podcasts that are just, talking about real estate, talking about the industry there, and I think that's brilliant. Ours is very holistic. It's very broad. I just want people to have an opportunity to share their story that they may not ever have a chance to share, right? We've had federal judge on, and so most people say, oh, that's the guy with the robe on that throws people in jail or prison, he doesn't have a life or whatever. So we bring him in and we talk about baseball, and we talk about things that are important to him. And so you see people in a different light. And I've had people comment to me going, I never knew he liked that. I never knew he was like that. And so if we can give people an opportunity to share their stories, and there's some people that have some deep, hard stories, right? And if we can give a platform for people to share their story or their dreams or their vision for what their life is going to be like, somebody else out there is going, I got the same thing. I got something similar to that. And so now Midland is finding the collaboration of people that they've never known that story about you. They never knew that you had to walk down that road of infertility or loss or divorce or whatever it is, or even the joys, right? Some people sharing stories of, I was headed down this dark road, but then this happened and now my life has turned around. And somebody else might be sitting out there saying, I don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. But that person that I didn't know existed shared that story now. And
Right.
so I think it's making people in Midland, Odessa more real in the sense of I'm not just a 9 to 5, 8 to 5 worker in whatever field. I have a story.
Right.
I have a past. I have a future. And that excites me in giving people an opportunity to share that.
You talked about like success, like from the companies, right? The powers that be. Were there success metrics that were talked about to going like, okay, we're going to start this podcast, we're going to support you. There's obviously a financial commitment to this, right? You've got to buy the equipment, you've got a brand new studio and things like that. What defines success?
Yeah, that's a great question because again, most companies define success with a dollar,
Right.
right? And I define success through that, but also just the fact of not so much popularity, but what is the brand, right? Protect the brand, right? But does anybody know what the brand is? Does anybody know what we do? Does anybody know where we're going? And I think that's key, is knowing where you're going and what you want to accomplish. I'm not going to bring in a lot of dollars per se, but I'm bringing in eyes. I'm bringing in viewers who at some point down the road, you may know, hey, a friend of mine, somebody needs some chemicals. I remember that chemical company that did that podcast, or they talked to so-and-so in the community and they mentioned, and so I think it's, again, I think I said earlier, there's a thread that runs through it, but what I'm gifted in is not selling a chemical. I'm
Right.
gifted in connecting people. And that's a space that not too many businesses have the time or the resources to hire somebody to be in that. You know, when I came to Performance Chemical, we had, a couple of projects that we have done in the past with community members, but there was no intentionality in connecting our company to a nonprofit, right? Most people in not just Midland, Odessa, but when it gets around October, November,
Okay.
it starts getting real antsy about wanting to give and wanting to serve, because those are the sexy months, right? That's when everybody wants to
fundraising?
give.
Yeah.
Okay.
Fundraising, donations, giving. Everybody wants to give the end of the year. That's, the holidays. Everybody gets into that mode.
Yep.
And that's great. But nonprofits need help in February. They need help in May. So organizations need to be intentional about a full year's investment. And one of the ways you can do that is to hire or put somebody in the space to make that connection and that investment for the year. I mean, a lot of times I visited with oil and gas companies, like, how did you get involved with that organization? Well, we told our, HR person, you've got 4 hours a week to spend on this. That's not really taking the company and investing in the community. But if you put somebody in that space that says your role is to connect us to the community, find where there's places that we can plug in. And one of the things that we're looking for the future is, what if we create our own nonprofit within our company? I visited with a lot of different people around town. Like, how did you start a nonprofit or philanthropic giving within your company? And we don't want to recreate the wheel, but what is the best way for us to give back to Midland? You know this. Oil and gas companies a lot of times get a bad rap, right? They're all about internal, they're all about making money, they're all about killing the environment, killing whatever. I think it's time that we reverse that and have some very positive things about the industry, right?
Yeah.
It's always negative on TV. So let's turn that negative into a positive.
Yeah.
Every company, if not a podcast, at least a YouTube channel, to where they can at least create content to address the narrative, right? I think that's just, I think it should be mandatory these days, right? But I also get that there's a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, and there's legal departments, and there's boards and things like that. And so a luxury for us, I guess, is that we're not beholden Best of Midland is not beholden to a higher, a board of directors or something like that, who may want to go like, well, you can have these guests, but you can't have these ones. And you can talk about this, but you can't talk about that. And, while it would be great to have some influx of capital, right, to build this thing out.
Right.
I think the balance is that like we can kind of do whatever we want. Obviously, we're gonna, but our goal is always to ultimately shine a light on this area of the country.
Yeah.
Outside of the podcast, I mean, I don't know that many more people who are more active in the community and out and about. And so, like, I don't think it for the person out there who's like, okay, I want to start a podcast. I want to interview local leaders and nonprofits and influential folks in the community. I don't think it just ends at, well, we hit stop on the cameras and turn off the mics and we're done. How much of your life is that part of and just being out and about in the community?
Coming out of the ministry background, we did a lot of serving, right? Paid ministry. I'm probably doing more in community engagement than I ever did in ministry, which is really blows my mind a lot because that was my job. My job was to do ministry and do community engagement and stuff.
Yeah.
But I'm doing a lot more now. And I think it's because it's just rolling out of who I am, right? It's just, again, it goes back to that gifting. What you're gifted in, you've got to be responsible enough to use that. Find how you can use your gifts to better the community that you're in. But I've also heard a guy tell me one time, he was like, look down at where your feet are. And wherever your foot is, that's where your mission is. So I think, okay, so I've been planted or I've been placed or I'm standing in Midland in this space. That's where my mission is. So if I'm standing in a nonprofit that helps kids with school supplies, that's where my mission is. That's where my focus is going to be. If I'm standing in next to a homeless person and we're having a conversation, that's now where my mission is. I think we get so wrapped up in the digital space. Again, we're looking at our phones, we're looking at what we're doing with our family. We're in travel this and we're travel that, and which is great. But look down to where God has placed you, right? I mean, you're here in Midland for a reason, too, to do what you're doing, and you're gifted in that, and you're doing it great. You're killing it, crushing it. So we've got to find, if a person is sitting out there listening or watching, and they're like, I want to do what Ryan and Jay are doing, go for it. Look down and see where you're standing. And if you're standing in a spot and a company that will allow you the space to do this, then go for it.
Yeah.
You don't need me. You don't need a professional studio. You don't even need your studio or anything like that to start a podcast, clearly.
Right.
You can do it with some iPhones. But it's a time commitment and a financial commitment to an extent. And also, you're not going to become famous overnight. But have you found with the clips now, like I tell people, I'm like, that's the gold of having a podcast because that's a true vehicle in the digital space, right? Is that what you're finding?
Yeah. I love your comment about, the famous part, because I don't want to be famous and I don't have a face for YouTube.
How dare you?
Nor the fit. If anybody out there wants to sponsor my fit each week,
Me
that
too.
would be great.
Okay.
Right. I mean, I pulled out the cool glasses after meeting you.
I love them.
Right. Which you don't have on right now, which
I got the
I'm very
yellows.
disappointed
I got the
in.
yellows, but here, I'll put them on for you.
Now it's
Now
the
we're
three
down
of
to-
us. We
now
got
we're
all
down
these
to-
cool
okay,
glasses on.
we're in
Right?
now.
So
We're
yeah.
in now.
So no, I think, I've had to learn. I can sit down and tell a story and draw it out of you to share with me, but all the digital stuff, all of the production, I leave that up to Chris. He's our producer. But I've learned from you at lunches, and talking, and Chris just, he just got back from the National Association of Broadcasters.
I know, I was jealous. I
in
saw
Vegas. And,
NAB, yeah.
yeah, and he came back and he's like, hey, I got to sit down with the QVC guy. And I'm like, yeah, way to go. But what he's learning is how to make what we're trying to accomplish better, right? I'm not trying to be number one on Spotify or anything like that. That's not what I want to, that's not our goal. Our goal is to help Midland be a better Midland, right? The people that live here, the people that work here, be better at what they're doing and help those that are around us. But as far as the clips and the digital space, what's crazy is we will post the full episode, post it to YouTube,
Right.
And we'll get a lot of hits off of that and stuff. But once I start dropping the clips, I will intentionally put a clip on and post it back to Spotify, and those numbers on the audio platform are growing because of the video clip, which is a very interesting to me. I don't know where that avenue started and began, because I'm thinking, oh, watch this little 30, 45-second clip and then go watch the bigger version of it.
Right.
Some people are doing that. But I'm getting people who are saying, we're listening to your podcast when I'm driving, listening to it when I'm at the gym, listening to it when I'm in the office. You told me, hey, drop it on LinkedIn real early, because those guys are sitting there at the desk at 8 o'clock and they want to check something out before they get into their routine. Great. But we get a few people who will listen and they're like, I want to see that person now.
Sure.
And so they'll jump back and they'll double dip us and they'll jump back over and they'll watch it because they want to see that community leader, or they're like, you know what? I know what Ryan looks like. I don't need to watch him, but I'll listen.
Okay. So I'm curious about this part. So I want to break this down for the people out there, because there are so many social networks, right? I can name off a dozen right now. Right. And I would tell most people, the clips are the clips, put them everywhere, because you never know,
where it's going to pop off.
You never know where it's going to pop off, right? Yeah. You've got a different audience in each network, even if you have some of double dippers. But what I'm hearing is you start with posting it on LinkedIn in terms of the overall clips in the video, right? Obviously it goes to YouTube first,
right?
And Spotify and Apple and wherever,
right?
Is it the LinkedIn? Because here's what I found over the last 6 months, especially in the oil and gas space, LinkedIn is the space.
Yep.
That's the place where they play.
Yeah.
Right. So you're saying you drop a clip on LinkedIn with a link to Spotify and a link to YouTube?
It depends.
Okay.
The full episode I'll put to the link to the full episode.
Okay.
But when I drop a clip on, it's typically got a pushback to the audio version.
Okay.
But you bring up a really good point, because like Facebook is a generational thing that I've not seen a whole lot of traction on.
Right.
For the clips, but I have on the full episode. Instagram, the reels, the stories, I'm getting a lot of attraction from that. But you mentioned really good about LinkedIn, because LinkedIn is the oil and gas industry people that are watching the show.
Right.
Right. So that has got to be that target base. So who I'm following, who I'm connecting with on LinkedIn has got to be in that oil and gas space to watch our podcast, because they recognize Performance Chemical.
Right.
So they're like, what is another chemical in business doing? What is an oil and gas industry doing? Oh, they're doing this podcast. Instagram, I'm not seeing a lot of oil and gas industry people watching it. Now, some of them are from their personal accounts,
sure,
but not from their business accounts.
Okay.
Right. So I think you've got to also spend some time learning who's where.
Right.
And what platform are they on? Like my kids, they're TikTok, they're not LinkedIn, right?
Right.
They're TikTok, they're Instagram. Well, our content is not going to really draw in the 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old. However, the guest is drawing them in.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So they're like, oh, what's this chemical company going to offer me? I'm 20 years old and I'm not in the chemical space, but I'm in the TikTok space, but I'm bringing in somebody in the community that they're like, oh, whoa, that cat's hip. He's cool. He's whatever the term is. And I'm going to watch because of that person.
Right.
So I think you've got to know all of those things. It's the content, it's the guest, it's the way, and it's the platform in which you pursue.
We produce an oil and gas podcast now called Power of the Permian. And that's where it sort of, a light bulb went off for me, because I started to create LinkedIn articles for each episode.
Right.
Right.
Brilliant.
So I would do for those who don't know, LinkedIn article is essentially a blog article, but it lives in LinkedIn. But the benefits of producing a LinkedIn article versus a blog article on your website is you probably don't get a lot of traffic to your website. Right. Which means there's no eyeballs there anyway. Right. If you have a decent size audience, or, a decent amount of connections on LinkedIn, you can create essentially a blog article. And then the ultimate benefit is you can tag people and companies within the article, and you can embed the podcast, right? So you get the best of both worlds. Once I started to do that, and I would tag, yes, it would be, the host and the guest, let's say it's Jay Whitlow from Performance Chemical, but I'm also going to tag Performance Chemical.
Yep.
And now the C-suites, or whoever's in charge there are going to get little notifications going like, we're mentioning an article.
Right.
What is this about? And then it's like, well, who wrote this? And, obviously if it's going to be in a good light, like, this is not TMZ or something.
Yeah.
And, started to get a lot of traction there in terms of people following. Like, if you want to build your network, for sure. And again, I'm just the producer. I'm not even the host. I'm never on the screen, but I'm the one writing essentially a recap of this podcast episode. And then the byline, like, it's produced by me, essentially.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think Breezy and Christian and those guys that are doing the space, I think they are crushing it as well. And I love seeing something new pop up, or I can't wait to see their episodes, right? And get ideas and learn from them. But one of the things that we've tried recently doing on our show that's worked with traffic and eyes is based on the type of questions that I ask, elicit a certain response. There's something that I want to get out of this response, right? So I may ask you, who would play a movie about you, right? And you would say...
Jason Momoa, obviously.
Jason Momoa, okay? Right. So I tag him.
You tag Jason Momoa?
Anything that's said in the show that I can tag to the person or to the company,
okay,
I will. And I'll get, like, we had one the other day and said, what movie would you play? And she was like, Reese Witherspoon or whatever. I did, and I got a reaction, right?
Okay.
So Southwest Airlines, whatever. I mean, it's like, oh, there's a plane flying over. In that conversation, whatever it is, I will intentionally try to draw out some popular names, some industry names, entertainment names, whatever it is, and I will tag. We'll have somebody on and say, what college you go to? I went to University of Texas. I will tag them, right?
Right.
And I'll get eyes, or I'll get a thumbs up,
sure,
I'll get a hook 'em, I'll get a something. So I know that people outside of Midland are watching and connecting to it.
That makes a lot of sense. Yep.
So I try to be intentional about that.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I do agree with you, right? There's so many YouTube channels, podcasts, social media accounts that are just solely around a certain, current events or, some sort of trend jacking or something like that. Like Terra and I, we talked about it. Like we could have a podcast of just us talking. You and Chris could just talk for an hour about things that are going on, right? And sort of pick a niche. But I think one of the biggest benefits, and the reason why I don't necessarily like agree with that every time, is that I believe that one of the biggest benefits to hosting a interview style podcast is the relationships that you're going to build with the people that are sitting across from you.
Yeah.
That you may, we've had the mayor on our podcast and in the studio now probably 3 or 4 times. The mayor would have never had a conversation with me prior.
Right.
Like just, off the cuff type of thing, right? I'm not going to just run into the mayor haphazardly. If you really want to do this right and you really want a successful podcast in 2024 and moving ahead, like regardless of if it's just for your city or you're talking about, an entire industry, you want to get on people across from you that are bigger than you. Because you get to enter their ecosystem.
100%.
They get to enter yours.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just like, hey, have you on? And it's not like a Good Morning America segment where it's like, I'm just promoting my book.
Right.
You know what I mean? Yeah, that's great. But the anchor and the author, it's when that camera says cut, it's done. Right?
Yeah. There is no connection.
There's no connection at all. Like we'll go hang out, what I mean, after this, or go to events. And again, we're in a smaller city. We're going to run into each other all the time, right? You might as well build these relationships. And who doesn't, at this point, people are like, yeah, I'll be on a podcast.
And I think there's no competition feel, because I'll get an invite to an event. I'll purchase a table and I'll call you guys up and say, what are you doing?
Yeah.
You want to come sit at our table? Well, in the industry is company A and company B, who are huge competitors. Are they going to do that?
No.
Probably not.
No.
No, they're going to want to make sure they bought the bigger table, the more expensive
and on the other side of the room from you.
Right.
Yeah. But just recently, and I think you guys were at one of the remotes we did at a local place in town. I think outside of the studio is valuable too, right? Getting into, we're not just going to interview you who own a restaurant. We're going to be in your restaurant.
Right.
We're going to get people to come to your restaurant. So we had a guest on, and he's starting a new business and everything and stuff. And so just recently he reached out to me and he said, "Man, we just want to say thank you for that podcast, that episode that we were on, because when people Google their company, our episode comes up
100%.
first."
Yeah. SEO value.
He said people have found us because of that podcast show.
Yeah.
I tell people to that point, like I tell people, YouTube should be a major focus. Like, I agree. Our episodes are on Spotify, our episodes are on Apple. I do not like their analytics, Spotify. Sorry about it. I don't. It's getting better, but YouTube is the king. It's the second largest search engine in the world. It just happens to be owned by Google. Right. And to your point, as unsexy as it is, people still Google things and look at search results. Right. It's not just about your Instagram account. Right. And again, if you search for anything best of Midland, we should dominate the first 5 pages of Google. Whether it be YouTube videos or our website or whatever. And that's another huge benefit as well. Right. Especially when you're trying to get visibility to your personal brand or the company you work for. Sponsorships or partnerships, stuff like that. You talked about wanting to perhaps get an apparel brand. That sounds awesome. We're currently looking for like beverage sponsors or just sponsors of the podcast as a whole. I feel like you have experience there in going after and getting partnerships or sponsorships. And I know a lot of people out there, again, they're looking at it like, I'm starting a podcast. It's not free. I do want to monetize this eventually. Can you offer any sort of advice there?
Yeah, I think we're wanting to get better at that, obviously, but being that we have our own kind of our, Performance Chemical presents this podcast, the funding for that piece is there. We're not going to go get another chemical company to sponsor something. So we have to be very careful on that. And plus, we're a for-profit company, so a lot of people aren't going to give to a for-profit company.
Right.
So we try to maximize through nonprofit. Like, we'd love to maybe mention you, or if you want to sponsor on this, but why don't you give to a nonprofit? And then we will collaborate with that nonprofit and we'll say, hey, it's just like Every Neighbor, great organization that connects with people in town. They're a big, sponsor for us. They believe in what we're doing. We believe in what they're doing. We use them. So if we had a way that somebody said, hey, we want to sponsor something on your show, why don't you give a financial donation to that nonprofit? And then that's how we can connect together. So that's one way. Or we try to go out to other nonprofits and say, do you need a podcast? Do you need to get yourself out there? And I know we've got one that's starting up. That's an organization that helps out people in the oil and gas industry that are in addiction and need to get rescued out of that and turn their life around. And so we're providing that as a space for them to do that. So I haven't really nailed down the best way to get sponsorships, but again, it's about collaboration. And we've had people in that have sat in the chair on our show that have said, hey, anytime you need to have something, call me and let me know because I was on your show. We've been able to go to those places and say, hey, we've got an event coming up. We'd love for you to give on behalf of being on the show. And we would do a dual partnership. This is a gift from, company A and the Catwalk to this, organization. So we've got to get real crafty on how we're going to get sponsorships, but right now it's not something that's
it's not
priority.
a monetary play you're looking.
Yeah,
it's not an initiative, I guess. For you. Interesting.
Well, my sponsorship could be promoting the nonprofit, right? Because they get free advertisement on the show, right? We don't charge, but we can promote them, and I think that's been a good platform for us. May not work for other organizations, but it's been a good platform for us.
If you're building a podcast about the community, then a great way to find sponsors is go out to local business owners.
That's how you collaborate,
right?
Yeah.
But I think it is. I think that you have to have some sort of plan of like, because no one's just gonna. I would say very few people are gonna go like, yeah, whatever you need for free, and we'll give it to you. Right? They want something in return, right? And it's just trying to figure out, well, what is it that you want in return? Like I'm always like, the buyer gets to dictate the value, right? And the seller gets to dictate the price, right? If I don't know what you value, I can't sell it to you, right? So you kind of have to figure out, like, is it just like, I just want my logo on the screen, or I want a full commercial, or I want product placement on the tables and on the desk, and I want my mugs or my whatever, a banner or something like that.
Yeah.
Um,
You know what a podcast can be? It can be what the traditional we're sponsoring a golf tournament can be, right? The whole thing about, hey, we got this sponsorship from, you know, uh, nonprofit X that wants us to buy a table, and with that you get your banner on the stage and you get your name and logo in the brochure or
Yeah.
whatever. That's what a podcast can be. It's just in the digital space. It's another avenue. It's another sales technique. It's another way of branding your company or your organization to the community in just a different way, right?
mhm.
I think it's a golf tournament is valuable, but so can a podcast be valuable as far as sponsorship and
I think we're
getting
going
on
to get
board.
there. It's just not as it's not as frequent yet, right?
Right.
Like the traditional things, yeah, like sponsoring a bar, or sponsoring an event, a
Yeah.
golf tournament. I just found out what a clay shoot was,
Mhm.
a couple months ago. I was like,
Those are awesome.
what does that mean?
I
Yeah.
really want to do one. I've never shot a gun in my life, but
Okay, did you hear that? We've got to get her out onto a clay shoot.
Can we get a
Can we
I
get a
should
clay
learn-
shoot sponsor?
yeah, and I need to learn how
Remington.
to shoot a gun.
and you've got those traditional things, but yeah, I think less and less people, it's growing, are going to be like, but do you want to be a sponsor of this podcast? And that's where, I'm a huge advocate of as many podcasts that pop up in this area, the better. We talked about,
Yes.
You mentioned competition earlier, where yes, to an extent, we are in competition as podcasts, right? And as podcasters, but not really,
Yeah,
right? Like,
not really.
we're trying to serve Midland in this area as a whole. And the way that these algorithms work is we all help each other
Mhm.
by, telling stories, even if we have this exact same guest.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Like, it's even if we both have the mayor on,
Mhm.
which we have, like it's two completely different conversations.
Right.
Like I think that's what's unique about it. And I mean, it's like a small town, and everybody knows who she is, but it's like just different perspectives.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's the other thing is, just like with yours and Breezy's and others that are popping up, is people are starting to, at least what we're seeing is, hey, I want to be on yours. I want to be on theirs. How can I get on their podcast? How can I get on? People are starting to see that there's value in sitting behind a microphone. A lot of people say, I don't look good on camera. I'm scared of that or whatever. You know what? I tell them before we start, just like before we started, this is just a conversation.
Yep.
Mhm.
There's no difference between what we're doing right now and that we could be sitting at a coffee shop
100%.
and having a conversation. There's just a mic and a light and a really nice sofa, and there's those things, and you've got to get past those and not look at those. But I've had some people on that are like, I'm not a real good speaker, whatever, and those have been some really cool interviews. Yeah.
For the people out there, in the past over a year now of podcasting, what's been the most difficult part of this whole journey for you?
I think for me, the difficult part has just been staying on the A game every time, right? Is always making sure that you're up, making sure that you help the guest if they're nervous, if they're scared, if they're timid, whatever, or they get off track. There've been a couple times when I'm like, okay, I need you to focus and reshift, and that's been the hardest thing for me, is to stay up on that. But I don't have a problem talking to people.
Sure.
I love going up to somebody that I don't know and say, hey, we've never met before, but you would be great on our show.
Yeah.
And I know we had Jessica McCoy on, and I said, who are some people that you would recommend that need to be on a podcast or on a show or to tell their
Oh,
story?
that's a great.
And then boom, she gave me a list of people, and half of those
Yeah.
people have said yes.
Excellent.
Wow.
That's great.
And so I'm like, that's really cool. That is now bringing, again, another level of collaboration for the community. Because I said it earlier, you've said it a lot of times. Our role in sitting in this chair for a podcast is to help Midland become a better Midland, help the community become a better community.
Yep.
If we're going to invest in this, why would I want to just go internal?
Well, listen, congratulations on what you're doing. We really look at you as an inspiration
Thank you.
to what you're doing in the community, and I'm always like, well, how's Jay finding all these things? He must not sleep. I think it's
True.
fantastic. Yeah, well,
True.
excellent. But I think it's fantastic, and definitely check out the Catwalk Show
Yeah.
on YouTube and Spotify and Apple and all the social networks. And can't wait to see you out at HEB.
Yeah.
Probably in an hour.
Or Chick-fil-A.
Or Chick-fil-A.
That's where I'll be.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Get his order ready.
And they do know my order.
Do they really?
Yeah.
You
Funny
just order
funny
it
story
now?
there. No, I pull up and sometimes they won't even have to ask me. They'll just start punching in the things and say, go ahead, pull up front.
You're frequent.
I got invited to the Christmas party 2 years in a row, the company Christmas party.
Hold on. Just from being the frequent guest. I mean, you had him on the podcast.
This is
right?
before the podcast. Yes, I've had a couple of people
Okay.
Chick-fil-A on the podcast, but
That's
yeah, this was
funny.
before the podcast. I would go there. People, it freaks my kids out
Yeah.
Sure.
because they're like, they don't want to ride in the car with me. And when they were younger, they were like, we're not riding in the car with you because everybody at Chick-fil-A knows who you are. And I'm like, but that's not a bad thing.
Yeah.
No.
You know?
Chick-fil-A celeb.
Yeah, I don't know about that, but
It-
Well, everyone check out the Catwalk Show. We'll obviously post the links in the description and a LinkedIn article.
yeah, there you
And
go.
you're going to be nice and big on the thumbnail.
Uh-oh.
It's
No.
going to be beautiful. You always look great. And we'll catch you on the next one. All right. Bye.